All right, I gotta sit down for this one. Hey guys, Cassie here. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I just wanted to chat and kind of rant a little bit about traditional publishing versus indie publishing, pros and cons. Not really pros and cons. That's the wrong thing to say, but just like what the stigma is and why I think it exists. Because I think there are people on both sides of the debate that are wrong in some ways. And I want to talk about it, I guess. I was having a conversation recently with someone on the AuthorTube Facebook page about this with a few different people. And there are some things we agreed on and some things that we didn't agree on. So I thought maybe I'd just kind of make a chatty video about it and see what y'all think. So there is a stigma regarding self-published works, that self-published works are not as good as traditionally published works, and that some people believe that self-published authors are not real authors, or that their works aren't going to be, they're not as good of writers, they're not professional, and that if you were a professional writer and really wanted writing to be your career, you would just pursue traditional publishing. Now, there are a lot of reasons why that's not true. Mostly it just comes down to the fact that people have different preferences, and just because someone chooses a different path than you doesn't mean that their path is worse than yours. And it also doesn't mean that their path is better than yours either. It just means that you are different people and you chose different paths, and that's fine. And I think a lot of those views, the reasons behind them, are wrong, but I think also some of those reasons are kind of justified. And that's sort of where I tend to get in disagreements with people. Because nowadays, a lot of people really do recognize that self-published authors can be professional and they can have really good books, and it doesn't mean that they're not real authors or that their books aren't as good. A lot of people nowadays also just recognize more of like the reasons why people would choose self-publishing, and that it's not always just a matter of their book wasn't good enough to be published by a traditional publisher or to find an agent. Sometimes there are other reasons why people choose that path. So a lot of people nowadays do recognize that. And nowadays, if someone just is spouting off nonsense that like self-published authors aren't real authors and they're just self-published because they couldn't get an agent, it's pretty much just easy to ignore those people because they're stupid and they don't know what they're talking about. But where I end up kind of getting an actual conflict, not necessarily like in a bad way, just disagreements, I guess, with people, is when I start to recognize that those people are right about some things. This is where my opinions start to get a little unpopular, especially in kind of the AuthorTube community where a lot of people are self-published authors. Now, I should start out by saying I myself am a self-published author. I love being self-published. I don't know that I ever plan to not be self-published. I've considered it for future works, and I'm not entirely ruling it out because there are a lot of benefits, but I'm not really sure if I want to pursue that path. Even if I could be guaranteed an agent right now, I still don't know if I would accept that. So I could talk for a long time about why I chose the self-publishing route, but I'll kind of just touch on it briefly. There are a lot of pros and cons. Some of the pros are, I have the main pro, the one that's most important to me, is that I have complete creative control and freedom over whatever I'm putting out into the world. Now, this is very important to me, especially in a current political climate where certain topics that are controversial, some people don't want you to talk about them, or there are some views out there that I personally hold that are being attacked as hateful or, you know, wrong or whatever. And I disagree with that. And even if I didn't hold, there are some views out there that I don't hold that are being attacked constantly, that I still think people should have the freedom to discuss if they want to. But of course, publishing agencies also have the freedom to say, you're welcome to write a book about that, but I'm not going to publish it because I don't want to promote that message. So I will publish your book if you take that part out. And that's not something I'm comfortable with. I want to have complete creative control and freedom to talk about as much controversial stuff as I want and not have anyone trying to censor me. I'm not talking about like government censorship or something. It's totally within their rights as a business to say, I'm not going to work with you unless you change your story because I don't want to promote that message. That's totally fine. They can do that. But I'm going to take my business elsewhere then. And the easiest way for me to do that is to just take my business to myself, and then I don't have to worry about that at all. I'm also just a very independent person in general. I run my own cleaning business. That's what I've been doing as a career for, let's see, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 4 years now. And I love it because I just like to handle everything myself. I'm a little bit of a control freak. I like to be in control of everything. So I like that about indie publishing. I like that I can control how much my books cost because sometimes I might want to make my book significantly less expensive so that more people will be able to read it. And maybe that means I make less money, which a publisher might not be okay with because that means they make less money, but I don't really care because I just want more people to enjoy my story. You know, I might also want to give away my book for free sometimes or make it so cheap that I'm making no money off of it. Like, I don't know, I might do that. I also like that I have complete creative control over my cover, which is something that you have very little control over in traditional publishing. So basically, the main thing that I like about indie publishing is the control. But there are also some other factors I like. I like how fast it is because I've thought before about like, okay, what if I got an agent right now? Then it might still be a year or two, maybe, before whatever book I'm currently finishing even comes out. And that is a concept that I feel like I don't understand how people do that because first of all, I'm just impatient and I want it to be out now. But secondly, like I don't see how you can get all hyped up and excited again about a book that you wrote when you wrote it years ago. Like by the time it comes out, you've maybe already written 2 other books since then, and it's been years since you visited this story in your mind. And now all of a sudden it's like release day is coming and you need to get hyped about this book you wrote 2 years ago, even though you're already moved on to something else. I feel like it would be hard for me to do that. So I would rather my book come out immediately so that I can share it with people while I'm still super, super excited about it. That's just a preference of mine. Again, there's nothing wrong with anyone who wants to do the traditional route. It's just not my preference. So there are a lot of things that I like about indie publishing, and I want to be clear on that before I dish out any kind of critiques. You know, it's funny to me when people act like I'm bashing indie publishing when I'm like, you realize that I'm an indie published author, right? Like, I'm not bashing myself, so obviously I'm not talking about all indie authors. But anyway, just want to get that disclaimer out of the way. So there are a lot of great things about indie published works, and I definitely don't agree that in just a general statement that like indie published books are worse than traditionally published books. They can be just as good. I could even be better quality. They happen to hire a better cover artist or a better formatter than in a traditionally published counterpart. Editing is something that also can be just as good if you hire a professional editor. There's really not much of a difference between hiring a professional editor yourself as a self-published author or having your publisher or publishing company edit your book as a traditional published author. Those are the same. The end result of the book, they can be just equally as good if you put in the effort and the work. So that's absolutely true, and anyone who says that's not true is just doesn't know what they're talking about. However, some people go so far in the opposite view as to say that the stigma against indie published works is completely baseless and that it's unfair and doesn't make any sense. And I would agree that a general stigma is unfair. It's unfair to just generally say that indie published books are worse than traditionally published. But I don't agree that the stigma makes no sense and that it's completely baseless. Because here's the thing. Yes, indie published works can be just as good if the author decides to go through all the steps to make it just as good. However, when you are a self-published author, you can do whatever you want, which means you can skip all of those steps. You can not hire an editor, not hire a professional formatter, not hire a cover artist, and maybe you're really awesome at self-editing. And maybe you're really great at formatting, and maybe you have an artistic friend who makes an amazing cover for you free of charge. That is possible, but it's not as likely as someone who has money and spends that money to invest in their book. It's not as likely that you're going to end up with a quality of a product as the person spending more money on it would. Does that make sense? So the thing is, when you are traditionally published, you can't skip those steps. It's like impossible. You can't just go around them unless like a publishing company is skipping all those steps, which would be really stupid. I've never heard of that happening. But professional publishing companies and agents wouldn't allow you, the author, to say, oh, I don't really need it to be edited, or oh, I don't really need to hire a cover artist, I'll just design something myself. They would say, no, we're gonna hire a cover artist and it's gonna be better, trust me. And they would say, no, we're gonna have it edited. Now, when it comes to editing, there's debate to be had about whether or not it's good or bad that editors, when you're traditionally published, might have a little bit more of a say than editors when you're self-published. And let me try to explain that, because that was a weird way to say that. Basically what I'm saying is, when you're traditionally published, it's my understanding that the editor will tell you these are the things that need to be changed, and you somewhat have the ability to veto things and to say, I really don't want to change that, and I understand you don't like it as much, but it's very important to me. But there's kind of an understanding that you should pick your battles and that you shouldn't, say that about every little thing that they tell you to change, and you really need to decide, okay, is this worth arguing about, or should I just let it go and trust their professional opinion? So editors, you might end up getting rid of something or changing something in your story that you wouldn't have if you had hired an editor yourself as a self-published author. So as a self-published author, you can hire an editor, they can tell you all the things you need to change, but then that's kind of the end of their job. And if you say, okay, thank you, and then decide not to change those things, that's your choice. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I don't think there's anything they can really do to force you to change, or to coerce you or convince you to change them. You can just say, I appreciate your opinion, but I disagree with that, and I'm keeping that scene. And there's debate on whether or not that's a good thing, which one of those is better, because sometimes professional editors might be wrong, and sometimes you might fight to keep a scene that fans end up loving, or maybe the fans don't like it, but you don't really care because it's your favorite scene and it doesn't matter. You want it to be in your book because that's your book and that's the scene you wanted to be in it. And I think there's absolutely truth to that, which is one of the reasons that I'm self-published, is because I don't want people trying to coerce me into changing things that I don't want to change. But there's also some truth, I think, in the fact that professional editors are removed from the story emotionally, in the sense that they aren't going to be too broken up about saying, this part's really confusing, or this part's not very good, so I think you should take it out and the story would be stronger without it. Whereas you as the author might be too emotionally attached to that scene because it took so long or was so difficult for you to write that you're not really seeing the fact that it would be a better story without that scene. So when it comes to editing, I think self-published books can be awesome if the author has enough wisdom to listen to either their professional editor, or if you're not doing professional editing, at the very least, you should have some kind of like beta readers or somebody reading your book and giving you feedback. And I think their books can end up being really good if they have enough wisdom to listen to those people and to change the things that they say to change if it seems appropriate. And that might include some things that are really, really difficult for you to change. There are things in my first book that were really hard for me to hear when my mom and sister both said that they didn't like it, because I really liked it. But they both said that they very strongly didn't like it, and I decided to change it. And guess what? Now, years later, I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, thank the Lord that they told me that that was bad, because they're so right. It was bad, and I just couldn't see it at the time because I was too emotionally attached to the story. So yes, self-published works absolutely can be just as good, but it is a fact that it's possible for someone who wrote a book to just write it and put it up on the internet as a self-published work with absolutely zero rereading, editing, cover design, formatting, anything. So therefore, there's a lot of garbage to weed through if you want to find good self-published books. Good self-published books are totally out there. There's a plethora of them. There are tons of them. A lot of self-published authors are really good writers, but there are also a lot that are just utter garbage. And I think to compare that to the fact that, well, some traditionally published books aren't very good either, and people talk about like 50 Shades of Grey, like that's really popular, but it's a stupid book. And it's like, yeah, I agree that that book's dumb and the writing isn't that great, but we're talking about the difference between a book that's kind of dumb and the writing's mediocre, and a book that is possibly like littered with typos and grammatical errors and sentences that just don't make any sense or are very repetitive, scenes that are just super dull and boring because nobody read it and said, oh my gosh, dude, get to the point. You know, there are problems that come up in books that editors catch that are just not going to make it past the editing phase. So if you refuse to do editing, you run the risk of having problems in your book that make you seem, basically, that make people know, oh, this was probably a self-published book, because an editor absolutely would have caught that. And I'm not talking about the things that some traditionally published books are really dumb or kind of boring or whatever, or just not your thing. I'm talking about things that are really, really basic writing 101 kind of mistakes that all writers make sometimes that should be caught by an editor. So basically, my perspective on this is that I kind of understand when people say that they don't really want to read self-published works, or they're not really willing to do the digging to find good self-published authors, because there is so much out there to weed through. And a lot of it is really, really bad. And I think it's just unfortunate to me when sometimes people who are so like pro self-publishing get a little too gung-ho about acting like that's not the case. And I think that that's just a little dishonest, because maybe they've just never seen them, but I've read some books by self-published authors, or like started to read them and didn't end up even buying them, just read like excerpts or whatever, that were like so not good. And I hate to say it, and I would never like tell those people that to their face unless they were asking me for editing advice or something, but I've read some things that I just like, these are really basic mistakes, and it makes me feel like I'm immediately thinking, I feel like this person didn't have an editor, because I don't see how they wouldn't have changed this. And I can't say that I've ever read a traditionally published book. I've read some traditionally published books that I think are terrible, but they don't generally have these same like very, very basic mistakes that some self-published works have. Because again, it's possible as a self-published author to just not edit your work, and that's a huge mistake. And that doesn't happen with traditionally published works. That's absolutely never going to happen. You're never going to have a traditionally published author write a book and immediately put it out into the world with no one else reading it. So I think right there, that is one thing that traditional publishing has it's a gatekeeping thing. There are certain levels of bad writing that are never gonna make it past that gate, and self-publishing doesn't have that. So again, to be clear, I'm not saying all self-published works are that level of bad. I'm just saying that if there are books out there that are that level of bad, they might be able to be they are able to be self-published, and they would never ever make it to traditional publishing. So that means there's a lot of duds out there to weed through if you're gonna try to find a good self-published book. So I don't know, I guess that's kind of all I wanted to say. I feel like sometimes I don't like the stigma, of course. Of course I don't, because I'm a self-published author. I don't like the stigma that self-published books are only, you're only self-published because you couldn't get an agent and your book isn't good enough or whatever, because nowadays that might have been more true in the past, I don't really know, but nowadays there are so many benefits to self-publishing that go far beyond like, oh, I don't want to deal with an agent or an editor telling me my stuff is bad. Like, that's not the only reason people get self-published nowadays. So that's not true. Self-published books can be super awesome still, but it's possible that they could not be also to a level that is so bad that it would never make it past the gate of traditional publishing. So I feel like even if you read a traditionally published book that's really bad, it's never going to be as bad as the worst self-published book out there that you could find. I feel like they would just be light years above. Even the worst traditionally published book is going to be light years above the worst self-published book. I just feel like that's an objective fact, and you're welcome to disagree with me, and I don't mean any offense, but I just think it's true. There are also a lot of benefits to traditional publishing as well. I want to touch on that. I'm not traditionally published, so I can't necessarily speak to all of them directly because I don't know them all. But if you are interested in traditional publishing, I would really recommend you look up Alexa Dunn's channel. Her last name is Dunne. She is a traditionally published author on AuthorTube, and she makes a lot of videos about just very honest, open videos about the traditional publishing process and how everything works and what the pros and cons are. And some of the cons, to me, some of the cons she says, I'm okay with that because it's worth it to me for the pros. And some of the cons that she says she's okay with, I am not okay with, and that's why I'm not traditionally published. So it's totally fine, whichever route you choose is better for you. Neither one is worse, neither one is better objectively. Some are better at some things and worse at other things. And some are better for some people and worse for other people, because we're all different, in case you haven't noticed. So, yeah. That's all I wanted to say, I guess. So I hope you enjoyed this ranty kind of video. I'd like to do more of these because I have lots of opinions, and it's always fun to share them with the world. But, you know, I mean, who knows if y'all want to hear this kind of stuff. So I guess let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed this video in particular, or this style of video. If you have any other topics related to books or writing, or even anything really that you want to hear my opinion on, let me know. Maybe I'll do a video on it. I kind of liked this sort of relaxed style of filming. So yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more from me in the future, subscribe to my channel. I post new videos every Tuesday and Thursday. And that's going to be it for this one. So I'll see y'all next time, and have a great day. Bye.